Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're decoding something incredibly complex, the unseen legal battles driving the very physical, very real chaos currently unfolding in the Strait of Hormuz. We're going to break down how dense international law and strategic geopolitical maneuvering have literally collided to create one of the most significant standoffs of our time. Let's start with a staggering, cold reality from early 2026. Picture this. 80 mines paralyzing one of the most critical energy choke points on the entire planet. This Guardian headline, it isn't just about military posturing. No, it's about a concrete, physical blockade that has effectively choked off global trade. Just think about those vulnerable merchant ships clustered together and completely frozen in the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, this is what a global supply chain disruption looks like in real time. But to really understand how we got to this massive gridlock, we actually have to look past the physical mines and the speedboats. We need to examine the invisible legal architecture sitting right beneath it all. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the 2026 Hormuz Crisis, look back at the 1980s tanker war, compare the two rule books of the sea, examine the strategy of lawfare, and finally, unpack the ensuing blockades and economic deadlock. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the 2026 Hormuz Crisis. Okay, so in April 2026, Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps attempted to fundamentally rewrite the rules of passage. How? By declaring a selective closure of the strait, specifically targeting vessels affiliated with the US, Israel, and their allies. But it goes way further than just blocking a few ships. Iran's main objective here is to act as the sole policeman of the waterway. They literally started demanding tolls from commercial vessels and requiring advance notification for military transits. By doing this, they're basically treating an international strait as if it were their own private domestic waters.
Section 2, the 1980s Tanker War.
Now, we have to look back at history to understand the present, because, believe it or not, the strait has been a brutal, heavily mined war zone before. Flashing back to the 1980s tanker war, which was a subset of the brutal Iran-Iraq war, we see a really devastating precedent. Between 1981 and 1988, there were hundreds of attacks on merchant vessels. We're talking 283 by Iraq and 168 by Iran. And the Iranian tactics back then, they're incredibly relevant today. They perfected the use of speedboats to target the crew compartments of ships, and they deployed shore-based Silkworm missiles. The chaos got so intense that it prompted direct U.S. military intervention, Operation Earnest Will, just to protect Kuwaiti tankers. And the historic data reveals a pretty stark truth. Ships flying neutral flags of convenience, like Liberia, which took 61 attacks, or Panama with 41, they absolutely bore the brunt of the damage. It just goes to show, when the strait becomes a war zone, neutral global shipping is almost always the primary victim. That specific history is exactly what makes the 2026 blockade so terrifying for international markets.
Section 3, two rulebooks of the sea.
So the crucial point here is that today's deadlock isn't just a battle of weapons. It's a profound clash over two entirely different maritime rulebooks. On one side, we have the older 1958 Geneva Convention, which relies on something called innocent passage. Think of this like a private toll road. Under these older rules, Iran claims the right to supervise, set conditions, and even suspend passage if they consider a ship a security threat. But on the other side is the modern standard, the 1982 UNCLOS agreement. This establishes transit passage. You can think of this one as a public highway. It guarantees continuous, fast navigation and overflight for all ships, civilian and military alike, and the coastal states simply cannot suspend it. But here's where things get immensely complicated. Here is a single, glaring fact. The US, Israel, and Iran never fully ratified that 1982 UNCLOS treaty. They signed it, sure, but never ratified it. That leaves those outdated 1958 rules technically still in play between them. So while the rest of the world views the 1982 public highway rules as customary international law that applies to everyone, Iran uses this massive technicality to insist they only have to honor the highly restrictive 1958 rules. Section 4, the strategy of lawfare. Let's look at how these specific legal gaps are actually being weaponized. The current crisis is an absolute masterclass in lawfare. That's the deliberate manipulation of legal proceedings in international law to achieve military or political goals. Iran isn't just randomly tossing mines into the water. No, they are purposefully using the friction between those 1958 and 1982 treaties to legally justify their kinetic military blockades. They claim they aren't attacking. They're simply enforcing their rightful laws against trespassing vessels. Legally speaking, Iran defends its actions through a doctrine known as the persistent objector. Because most of the world says those 1982 rules are now universal customary law, Iran uses this doctrine as their escape hatch. They argue that they have clearly, consistently, and expressly rejected the world's transit passage rules from the very beginning. Therefore, they claim they are entirely exempt from being bound by them. And as this timeline shows, this strategy was methodically constructed over decades. Iran didn't just wake up one morning in 2026 and decide to block the strait. Back in 1974, they proposed special rules for the Persian Gulf, which the world rejected. In 1982, they flat out refused to ratify UN clause. By 1993, they passed their own national law restricting foreign warships, which directly contradicted the global standard. Basically, they spent half a century carefully laying down the legal paperwork as a persistent objector before finally backing it all up with mines and speedboats in 2026. Section 5. Blockades and Economic Deadlock. This brings us right back to the present day, where this intricate legal standoff has pretty much paralyzed the global economy. Because the scale of military operations since early 2026 is so massive, observers have actually dubbed it the 2026 Iran War. And this completely shifts the legal framework. Now, the law of armed conflict kicks in, and that legally takes precedence over the law of the sea. Under the rules of war, blockades can actually be justified. Consequently, this justifies the U.S. launching a severe counter-blockade against Iranian exports, and it allows them to assert the right to neutralize any forces actively mining the waterway. We are way past arguing over transit treaties at this point. We are in an active state of hostilities. And that brings us to our current geopolitical stalemate. With negotiations in Pakistan completely stalled, Iran is using the physical closure of the strait as their ultimate bargaining chip. They're deliberately shifting the legal burden away from the global idea of freedom of navigation and focusing entirely on their own coastal state security. They're essentially daring the international community to blink first. The offer? They'll reopen the waterway, but only in exchange for lifting naval blockades and granting major nuclear concessions. Which leaves us with a pretty chilling reality to consider as we wrap up. If one nation can successfully weaponize the very laws of the sea to rewrite the rules of global maritime trade, it creates a massive incentive for others to do the exact same thing in places like the Strait of Malacca. So until a major strategic shift breaks this deadlock, how long can the global economy actually survive when international law is used to choke it? It's a question that goes far beyond 2026 and one we all need to be paying very, very close attention to. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.